네,
Inclusive Korea 2021. We will now begin the roundtable discussion of this event. The Moon Jae-in administration's 4-year journey, inclusive recovery, and a leap forward will be discussed during this roundtable discussion. Let me introduce the participants. First of all, the chairperson of the National Research Council for Economics, Humanities, and Social Sciences, Chairperson Jung Hae-gu, will serve as the chair. And also Professor Yoon Soon-jin of SNU, who is also the chairperson of the 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission, Chairperson Nam Yoon-suk of the PCNSP, and also President Moon Yong-sik of the National Information Society Agency, as well as the moderators of these sessions will participate. President Hong Jang-pyo of KDI, President Lee Tae-soo of Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs, President Han In-seop of the Korea Institute of Criminology and Justice, and President Go Yu-han of the Korea Institute for National Unification. Please come forward up to the stage. So let me briefly introduce to you the bio of Chairperson Jung Hae-gu. He is the 8th chairperson for the National Research Council for Economics, Humanities, and Social Sciences. He has served in many positions within the government, and I have high expectations for what will be discussed during the roundtable discussion. So I ask for your attention and interest. President Han In-seop, as soon as he comes up on stage, we will begin the roundtable discussion. Yes, I think that everyone is on stage, so let us now begin. I will hand over the mic to Chairperson Jung Hae-gu. Yes, ladies and gentlemen. We are here to hold a discussion under this roundtable discussion, and we will be dealing with what was discussed during the past 2 days under the grand theme of the Moon Jae-in administration's 4-year journey, inclusive recovery and a leap forward. I had intended to introduce the participants, but because the MC has already done so, let me just briefly introduce to you how I will proceed. So there were many different sessions, and this is the last session, the roundtable discussion. So if you look at the 4 years of the Moon Jae-in administration, you will find that in the beginning, there was a move to make the nation worthy of being called a nation. And so there was time spent on this, and then we were hit with the COVID-19. And so there were efforts to come up with the countermeasures to deal with COVID-19. And so, as we carried on discussions for the past 2 days, we started off with the countermeasures and responses towards COVID-19. This was dealt with during the keynote addresses. And then we talked about the Korean New Deal and the government opening up the future. This session was led by President Hong Jang-pyo. And then in terms of the inclusive society, we talked about the government having expanded welfare under the leadership of President Lee Tae-seop. And then President Han In-seop led the 3rd session, which is about a fair society and reform of authority. On session 4, this was moderated by President Go Yu-han, and it was on the topic of peace process in the Korean Peninsula and the peacekeeping government. So this is how I would like to proceed. Now, the moderators, the chairs of each session, because they are up on stage, they will give a summary of what was discussed during the discussions. And based on that, we would like to hear about what should be the policy direction as we go into the future. And so, let me give you the order of the remarks. First of all, President Hong Jang-pyo will speak about the economic side. Number 2, President Lee Tae-soo will talk about the inclusive society and the welfare sector. And number 3, President Han In-seop, he will talk about fairness and also the authority institutes. And last but not least, President Go Yu-won will talk about the peace process. And after that, we have especially invited 3 discussants. President Moon Yong-sik is an expert in the digital economy and digital issues. So we have invited him to talk about digitalization and related matters. And Chairperson Nam Young-suk has been dealing with the economy and trade as the chairperson of the Presidential Committee on the New Southern Policy. So I asked for comments made on trade and relevant issues. And last but not least, Professor Yoon Soon-jin, please talk about carbon neutrality. She gave a presentation yesterday, but I would like to ask her to speak on that topic. And the discussion for the 2 days was about recovery as we come out of the COVID-19 pandemic and another leap forward. So in that process of recovery and seeking for another leap forward, how will we create an inclusive society, including the vulnerable and the disadvantaged in our society? So with that in mind, please talk about what should be the policy direction going forward. The time given to us is about 2 hours, so let us use the time efficiently. And we had not been able to receive a lot of questions from the floor because of the time constraint. So, in order to receive questions from the floor, I would like to give 10 minutes to each discussant. And after that, we will receive questions or comments from our participants joining us offline and online. So, President Hong Jang-pyo, I invite you to give your remarks on the economy-related matters. And I think mainly he will be touching upon the Korean New Deal and what we should focus our attention on is in the process of pursuing a New Deal to ensure that our economy recovers. Well, we've been talking about a K-shaped recovery. And there are sectors that are showing rapid recovery, but there are other sectors that are lagging behind. So, as we experience a K-shaped recovery, how can we deal with the polarization that arises? And also, as the economy is promoted in the short term, we may see some improvements in job creation. But we are experiencing the ongoing of the fourth industrial revolution, and employment and job creation is not an easy challenge. So why don't you include this issue of employment in your talk as well? So President Hong, please go ahead. Thank you. Yes. Yesterday, during the first session, as it was introduced by Chairperson Chung, we talked about the Korean New Deal and also the future and what are the tasks and challenges we have to tackle. There were 3 presenters and 4 discussants who joined us. First of all, let me briefly introduce to you the main contents of what was discussed. And also, in addition, I would like to add my comments about how we should understand the Korean New Deal and what are some of the remaining tasks. So I would like to give you my view as a moderator, as a chair, after listening to all the opinions shared during the session. So first of all, the main points of the presentations and the discussion was that the Moon Jae-in administration after the COVID-19 had implemented a number of countermeasures, and that is known to be the K-quarantine. It was very innovative, and as you know very well, a New Deal policy was implemented. There is the Digital New Deal, and then there was a Green New Deal, which incorporated energy transformation. And also, there was the strengthening of the social safety net, and also there was the significance of the New Deals that was emphasized, and there was the New Deal for balanced national development. And Professor Kim Tae-young talked about how efforts can be made to promote mega-regional cooperation as a way towards national balanced development. And he emphasized that the initiative and the ownership should be given to the local regions. The Korean New Deals have 3 pillars, and the social safety net was emphasized, and I think that this was discussed more in detail in session 2, but it was also discussed in the first session as well. So the Korean New Deal, well, as the global community was hit with COVID-19, the Korean New Deal focused on how the government can play an active role to create new jobs. And there were discussions on the government efforts. And there was 2 large directions. First of all was investing in public infrastructure, and another was also, this is about infrastructure as well, but human infrastructure. So there was talk about human infrastructure investment, and these were the 2 large directions that were emphasized. So public infrastructure investment is linked with digital transformation to respond to and prepare for the 4th Industrial Revolution. It was recognized that this is something that is needed, and especially energy transformation and carbon neutrality is no longer something that we can choose to do, but this is something that we must carry on. And so transformation of our economy towards a low carbon emission society is an important responsibility for us, but at the same time, it was mentioned that this can provide us with new opportunities. And then in terms of investment in the human infrastructure, well, there was talk about digital transformation, and that active investment must be made into the human talents. So a lot of the discussants mentioned about this. And Dr. Randall Johnson from Columbia University, he talked about the research conducted by OECD on Korea, and he mentioned about the vulnerable employment social safety net in Korea, and he also talked about the OECD's perspective. In other words, that the dual structure in the labor market has been recognized by the OECD, and how there are structural challenges that has to be overcome. And so there needs to be measures put into place for structural changes. After the pandemic, the Korean New Deal will help promote the Korean economy, but at the same time, we will experience a paradigm shift in the overall global community, and the Korean New Deal will be carried out amidst such paradigm shifts. So the Korean New Deal, and also many different measures are coming out under the name of New Deal. And there has been questions asked about why the New Deal policy of the 20th century is re-emerging in the 21st century. But looking back, we can say that around the world, we can see that after the 1980s, as you well know, there has been the era of neoliberalism, and then the world was hit by the financial crisis in 2008, and that as a turning point. Inclusive growth has been emphasized by the global community, including international organizations such as OECD and IMF, because the past growth model showed limitations. And so there has been a turn towards seeking inclusive growth. And after being hit by COVID-19, there was an understanding that we have to go on further for pursuing growth while dealing with inequality, and seeking sustainability and also promoting fairness. Amidst the changing circumstances, the New Deal policy has come out in Korea, in the US, and also in other areas of the world. And so we can see that there has been this grand transformation and shift in policies. And amidst such a trend, the Korean New Deal was presented. So in the past, actually, it was difficult to imagine the financial injections and investments that were made to boost the economy. In the US, actually, 30% of the GDP was injected to revitalize the economy. So there has been many bold plans to help the economy recover. And this is the changes that we are experiencing at this time. So looking at the Korean society and the Korean situation, we can see that I think that there has been some sort of a time gap. So we were a bit behind in the trends in terms of responding by the political sector and the academic sector. We had the policies in place, but I think that if you look at the academic sector circle and the political sector, I think we were still focusing on the past policies. But amidst that, nevertheless, the Korean government has implemented a Korean New Deal. And so amidst academic debates that this is an old paradigm, there was criticism about that, and I could hear that a lot. For example, some of the previous economic officials, well, they had announced the Economic Agenda 2030, and I read that as well. But when it comes to social safety net and welfare, Milton Friedman's income tax, which is based on neoliberalism, was called for. It was proposed that these are needed, but even in the US, it was proven that policy-wise, this is an approach that cannot succeed. So I think that there were such debate within the academic sector and also the political sector, but nevertheless, the policy that was implemented was the Korean New Deal. And also the president in April had announced the plans, but starting with this year, we had actually implemented the policy, and this is being pursued step by step in a gradual manner. So we are now seeing the policies being implemented now, beginning with this year. And so I think that we have to wait and see for the substantial outcomes to come out, for the Korean people to really feel the tangible results. And I think we're headed towards that period. So when it comes to the policies implemented by the government, without the trust in these policies, it will be very difficult for the policies to obtain fruit and outcome. So that is something that we have to keep in mind as we go into the future. Now, the Moon Jae-in administration for the past 4 years has actually devised the policies, and now also, we are seeing the implementation of the policies. But also during the 4 years, it was a time of discourse. So now it is time for us to look back on what has been accomplished. We have to think about what can be done further. And I think that we need to have discussions on the further measures that should be implemented. So am I going over time? Yes, I think I used about 30 more seconds. But yes, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. So why do we need a Korean New Deal at this moment? That is something that we might want to think about. For example, the U.S. Biden administration has put in a lot of investment, and we can see that the overall large economic trend is changing. So we have to think about why the New Deal. So next, President Lee.
As have been introduced, I am Lee Tae-soo of the Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs. If you have participated in session 2, I'm sure that it's still fresh on our memories. Very briefly, we talked about the Moon Jae-in care and inclusive welfare as well as public care under our topic of inclusive society. In the case of Moon Jae-in care, without Moon Jae-in care, would we be able to have stable foundations without Moon Jae-in care? And so I think it's unimaginable that we would have done so well without Moon Jae-in care, which highlights the value of Moon Jae-in care. In terms of public health, there are still weaknesses that we need to supplement. Related to inclusive welfare, many different aspects have been mentioned. And if we take a look at the OECD Social Spending Index compared to the GDP, in 2016, just before the Moon Jae-in administration, the percentage was at 9.9%. In 2019, this percentage has grown to 12.2%. And so in just 3 years, we have increased this by 2.3 percentage points. This is indeed a great feat. In particular, this is quite amazing in terms of the increase in social spending. Of course, compared to the OECD average, we are far behind, but nevertheless, the 2.3 percentage point increase is a substantial increase. And so this actually shows in a nutshell the efforts that have been made by the Moon Jae-in administration. In terms of public care, the responsibility of the government in providing care for its citizens was mentioned, along with various programs and measures that have been reviewed. But we also talked about the need to improve the delivery system and also to create community trust. And so we have a far way to go in terms of the delivery system and the community trust. Based on these 3 presentations, I would like to share my thoughts as well. The social policies of the Moon Jae-in administration throughout the last 4 years actually concluded all of the chaos created by the last 10 years of the conservative government. And so it was an opportunity to read the trends of our times, to set the appropriate direction for social policies through various programs and measures. I don't think anyone could raise questions as to the social policies of the Moon Jae-in administration. In particular, the principle of innovation and inclusion was portrayed by the social policies and the economic policies of the Moon Jae-in administration. Up until now, we were always talking about the virtuous cycle of social and welfare policies with economic policies, but I believe that through the Moon Jae-in administration's efforts, we have been able to create a new level of connecting the social spending with the economic development. And we are always concerned about dualism within our society, and we have made strides in keeping intact the widening of the social gap. If we take a look at various figures, we can see that the gap is continuing to shrink. But despite these results, why do we not see some clear effects of these policies, in particular based on the experience of the people? So I think it's quite mysterious as to why the evaluations are not as high as we would expect. I would like to think about three aspects. First, because of COVID-19. COVID-19 actually is a crisis that is hindering the inclusive society and sustainable policies of the Moon Jae-in administration. And so all of the big plans designed for inclusive society in 2018 was hindered by COVID-19. And so I think I can point this out. And second, above all, fundamentally, we went through the development era of the 1970s, and then we went through the neoliberal policies of the 2000s. And then from 2008, we had the conservative government, which impacted the lives of the people of Korea. And because of all of the negative impact during the last 10 years and the time before that, it could not be normalized and cured and treated within just 4 years. That was an impossible feat. And so all of the problems that had accumulated could not be solved overnight in just 3 to 4 years. The third issue that I would like to point out is the consistency of the policies and the continuous review of the policies for better achievements. Did we continue these efforts during the last 4 years? I think we need to reflect upon this part. And so I have pointed out 3 factors as to why we are not able to experience the fruit of Moon Jae-in administration's policies, which actually increased the social spending by 2.3 percentage points. Why can't we actually experience the fruit of these efforts in our everyday lives? I think we can point out these 3 reasons as to why. So we need to go beyond the Moon Jae-in administration. We have about a year to go, less than a year in fact. And so we have to think about the time beyond the Moon Jae-in administration. And I think we need to think about 2 things. First, in the post-COVID-19 era, we will experience a large change in our environment. Thus far, we have talked about demographical changes, but post-COVID-19 will bring about a transformation of civilization. And this could include digital transformation. And so, we always thought that these changes were far into the future, but it was brought much closer to our reality because of COVID-19. And so, we need to be very intuitive in taking all of these changes into consideration. And above all, the welfare state of Korea was exposed to dual shocks. So, in the past, in the industrialization era, the welfare state was prepared for the lack of income. For example, we are not able to overcome the issue of poverty amongst the elderly. And then from the 80s, we had neoliberalism. And so from the social investment perspective, we needed to work with the issues of women and children and changes in technology. So we needed to provide care so that we could have more women participation in the economy. But we have not been able to respond well to the latter either. That is why we are seeing the low fertility rate of Korea and also the low women participation in our economy. So the gender gap still is at about 15%. And added to that, we have another risk, the so-called post-COVID-19 risk. And so the climate change and environmental degradation, digital transformation are all issues that we need to respond to together, coupled with the two previous shocks on our welfare state. And so I believe that these would be the most difficult factors lying ahead. Of course, we are already talking about this, but we need to think about participatory income, basic assets. And so we need to incorporate these concepts so that we could restructure the way of guaranteeing a certain income level. And many of the presidential candidates are also discussing these issues through their policy pledges and messages. And so we are at a point in time when we need to think about this. And in terms of care, we have to think about how we're going to restructure care and how to provide public care. Well, I think we should rack our brains for ideas for the traditional care services. But at the same time, we always thought that a green welfare state is a concept that is far off into our future. It was just an ideal direction, and we thought it was a far off reality. But people like Professor Yoon Soo-jin, who are in environment, would welcome this. I think when we think of a welfare state in Korea, we need to think about becoming a green welfare state. It's not just about redistribution of income and assets, but we also have to think about our impact on the environment. And this is not just for a just transformation, but we need to make sure that we change our total system to become green so that we become a green welfare state. There is much to say, but I'm sure that there will be more opportunities to speak. I will wrap up the summary for session 2 at this point in time. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you, President Lee. Well, we have listened to President Hong and President Lee, and if we bring those two summaries together, we can see that the Korean society and also societies around the world are changing quite dramatically. Before COVID-19, we always talked about the post-neoliberalism, but with COVID-19, we are now thinking about the post-COVID-19 world. And so that is the question on our minds. And so related to this, President Hong talked about the New Deal. And President Lee has talked about not just creating a virtuous cycle of growth and distribution, but becoming an inclusive nation and including other aspects of welfare, such as basic income, into our system. So we are in a process of creating mega changes within our system. And then we will listen to Chairman Yoon Soo-jin later on. Carbon neutrality will be another large change within our society. And so if all these changes are coupled together, then we will indeed be met with a new normal. And we can expect various changes. And so we are amidst all of these changes.
So let us go on to listen to President Han In-seok, who will talk about the session on a fair society and reform of power structures. Yes, today early in the morning, there was a session about a fair society and the government's initiatives to reform power structures, which was held under the theme of fairness, peace, and a leap forward. Now, the detailed themes that were discussed was the reform of prosecution, fair trade, revisions and improvements, and also democratization of the market, and some of the impeding challenges, including anti-corruption, and upholding integrity. So we could see that institutionalization and legislation and policy making has seen great progress throughout this administration. First of all, in terms of the prosecution and authority, there was views shared that a lot of progress was made in terms of keeping the prosecution in check, and also in terms of anti-corruption. The integrity level of the nation climbed from 52 ranking to the 33rd ranking. So of course, our goal may have been higher, but we are moving in the direction of becoming a more integral nation, and we can clearly see this improvement. Also, when it comes to the fair trade, we can see that efforts have been made to strengthen fair trade. For example, improvements in the relationship between subcontractors and contractors, and other efforts have been made. And so there has been improvement in the legislation as well, especially in 2020 to 2021, there has been such legislative movements to improve the law to support fair economy. So we have been institutionalizing and implementing new policies and legislating new laws to promote the fairness in our society. And also we have been keeping in check the possibility of abuse of power and status, and we have been working towards promoting transparency, and there has been achievements made in this direction. Now, from a new perspective, there may be need to talk about the redistribution of power and authority among the different authority institutions, and also to strengthen the sovereignty of the people. We had evaluated that more could have been done. And so, what could have been done could have been pursued through a detailed plan for the reform of the judicial system, but this actually was not carried out in full-fledged. It was stopped at a certain stage. And also, new power structures have emerged, and I believe that we can call this the authority or the power of officials that have come into power after taking an official public civil servant exam. So because they had passed an exam and raised to a certain position, after going through a certain official process, they have come to obtain power and authority. But nevertheless, when it comes to the authority of these officials, well, listening to the discussion that was carried out, if I give you my personal views, compared to the political authorities in power, there are some differences because the political authorities and powers are switched every 4 years after the election is taken, or every 4 to 5 years, whereas this authority and power held by the officials that were appointed to the positions after taking an official civil servant exam is there to stay for a prolonged period. And also sometimes these authorities are linked with political powers and therefore intensifies and strengthens in our society. And so also we can see that there are elite cartels in our society. I don't think that this terminology is accurate, but how should I put this? Those who are in official positions they enjoy privileges, and they have created our cartel or a fraction to continue to enjoy these privileges. But if you look at the legislation and also if you look at the various government activities, these elites, they are serving as the gatekeepers. The people, the citizens of Korea, however, are now voicing their opinions, and they have been calling for the president and also the prosecutors to take action when a certain problem arises. And such calls of the citizens sometimes have led to the side effect of further strengthening these officials' authority and power. And so the authority of these officials, well, they have become even stronger over the years. But in order to prevent the concentration of power, there has been many efforts made under this administration. For example, the CIO was established along with the NOI, and I think that now we are understanding the side effects of the authority structure, the power structure in place in our society, and that is why we have been seeing efforts to reform them. But there is room for improvement, and I believe that the reform, well, it seems like it hasn't been 4 years and 2 months, but actually it has been 9 years and 2 months since the reform has been carried on, because I think that it continues the efforts made under the participatory government. There were some failures that were experienced during the participatory government period, and so we have learned lessons, and based on those lessons, reform efforts have been implemented. And so I think that we have to review the reform once again in a thorough manner before we proceed forward. So first of all, we have to look at the vision and the reality. Now, if we do not look into the future and predict the future, we think that it would be difficult to actually take a step forward. But at this moment, we really have to take action. We can use our eyes to see what lies ahead, but what we need is also to take action. So, the title that we see here is Another Leap Forward. And I think that what is important to take step-by-step efforts. And we should not be too overly focused on the short-term achievements. I think that the inconveniences and the difficulties and the challenges, these are always raised beforehand when anything else is talked about. So I think that, however, rather than looking at the short-term difficulties and challenges, we have to take a long-term perspective and evaluate the achievements of the current efforts after about 10 years. And also, we have to focus on the details. They say that the devil is in the details. So we have to come up with a well-prepared plan and then execute these plans. And also, we talk about irreversible institutions. I think that we need strategic planning for institutionalization. For example, the Constitution Court and the Sejong Innovative City, the law school system. Well, the death penalty, for example, we have made sure that we cannot revert to the past. So we have to have this in mind, that once we implement a strategy, it is difficult to go back to the past. So, irreversible institutions. And also, We have to normalize the most dilapidated and obsolete elements of our society. So, for example, let's say that there is a prison. What we have to do is not focus on building a state-of-the-art prison, but we have to overhaul the most dilapidated prison. So what we have to do is not only look at the maximum point of reform, but the minimum level of reform that we can achieve. The low-hanging fruits are also something that we have to think about. And also, in the process of reform, I think that many people can suffer. This is a very painful process, and many people will be hurt. But I think that if we look at the people who make sacrifices, there are different people in our society who make sacrifices. And I do believe that along with the achievements, the sacrifices, and the pain, the difficulties, we have to consider them as well. We have to know that it's not just the glory, but also there are the challenges that we have to overcome, and there are sacrifices made in the process. So throughout the 4 years, we have seen many developments, and at the same time, I think that it is time to look at the principles of ABC of reform once again. Yes, thank you very much. So he mentioned a number of very interesting points. For example, he talked about the officials who were placed into power after passing a government official exam. And for example, the elected officials, they actually receive evaluation in a couple of years. But those who are put into the powerful positions or the status with authority, they are there for a long-term period because they have passed a certain exam and were placed officially in those positions. And also this was not included in the discussion, but this came to my mind listening to all the views. Well, when it comes to the issue of distribution and the issue of fairness, we always have to think about the fairness of distribution, and also we have to think about the fairness that is mentioned among the young people. And this is widely dealt with in the media. We haven't talked about this much during our sessions, but I think that the older generation, well, in the views of the youth and the young people, it seems that the older generation are taking all the opportunities, and so the young people are calling for the opportunities to be given to them. They want greater options and opportunities. So if time allows, perhaps we can talk about this issue as well. Let's go on to our next speaker.
The next topic was related to peace, and we would now like to turn to President Ko Yu-hwan. Well, session 4 was conducted just a little while ago, and so I'm sure many of you have tuned in to session 4, so I don't think I need to be long in my summary. So we took a look at the peace process on the Korean Peninsula, and under the topic of peace process on the Korean Peninsula and peacekeeping government, we took a look at responding to North Korean nuclear crisis and maintenance of peace on the Korean Peninsula, strengthening of defense power, realization of responsible defense, and inclusive international cooperation and diversification of international diplomacy. So we took a look at the nuclear issue, peace on the Korean Peninsula, defense, and international diplomacy. The overall flow of our session dealt with the fact that we prioritized peace for the Korean Peninsula. President Moon has announced only peace through the Berlin Declaration. Peace was given the highest priority above any other values. And so that is why we had the policies for peace on the Korean Peninsula. And before the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, we have postponed the Korea-US joint military exercises. And North Korea, up until 2017, conducted various tests for the advancement of their nuclear program and missiles. But ever since the success of the Hwasong-15 on November of 2017, they have not conducted missile tests in 2018. So from 2018, we have had the new trend of peace and coexistence, and the turning point was the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. We had the high-level talks, and we had envoys sent to North Korea to meet Chairman Kim Jong-un, and we actually heard that Kim Jong-un had no reason to maintain their nuclear program if they were given guarantee for their regime. And that message was then conveyed to President Trump, which led to the Panmunjom Declaration and the Singapore Joint Declaration. And that was the main flow of 2018 up until Hanoi. The Hanoi summit ended as a no deal. And then we had COVID-19 breakout in 2019. And we also had the presidential election in the US. So up until now, we have been in a stalemate. But the overall flow to build peace and to keep peace and the achievements in that process was quite outstanding. Up until now, we have not been able to complete the peace-building process, but in the remainder of the term, we look forward to reigniting the momentum for peace on the Korean Peninsula. Having said that, there are some variables. Whether it be Biden administration or Trump administration, people believe that they will maintain the sanctions on North Korea. And because of the G2 competition, the alliance between China and North Korea will be strengthened because next week they will celebrate the 60th anniversary of bilateral relations. And so this may actually become a turning point to even stronger ties between China and North Korea. Because of the strategic competition between the US and China, it's very difficult for China to move away from the sanctions and side with North Korea. And so by the fall, then we may be able to resume inter-Korean dialogue and the US-DPRK talks. Dr. Scott Snyder was not optimistic that talks will be resumed within the term of the Moon Jae-in administration. We have to take a look at the possible postponement of the joint exercises, but Scott Snyder mentioned that it's probably difficult for the U.S. to make this decision on postponement because it will not impact the resumption of talks. But Dr. Lee and others have mentioned that there is a possibility that we will have another opportunity during the fall of this year. Another important point is about how we can link responsible defense with peace on the Korean Peninsula. Last year, we have invested 50 trillion won into defense. And so the strengthening of the defense power, is it contradictory to peace on the Korean Peninsula? Well, I believe that defense power is targeting peace through deterrence. And so we can see that North Korea is approaching peace by nuclear armament. We cannot have our own nuclear program, but by building our defense power, we are trying to make the situations symmetrical to maintain peace. And so it is not contradictory to peace building on the Korean Peninsula. So this is a two-track policy. So it may look contradictory on the surface, but the two are not contradictory. But with patience, we will be able to see the results of these policies. And in the remaining term of the Moon Jae-in administration, how can we control the variables? Well, we are in a stalemate, and so we may end the term like this, and that would actually make all of the achievements thus far insignificant. And so we will need a irreversible peace process. We need to make sure that we do not destroy the achievements made thus far and work on institutionalization. In particular, the September 11th military agreement between the two Koreas is maintained until now. And so we do have arms control, and this is a great achievement, but I don't think we have had enough recognition of this achievement. Well, the structural arms control is related to the U.S., but in terms of operational arms control, we can, for example, alleviate the limitations on the missile system, for example. The September 11th military agreement, the Inter-Korean Declaration, the Singapore Joint Declaration are a part of the framework that will be leveraged by the Biden administration. Well, we are close to the end of our presidential term, but the Biden administration is just starting their term. And so I don't believe that North Korea can make the choice of strategical aggravation, because if they aggravate in the initial stages of the Biden administration, then relations may be difficult throughout the term. Well, COVID-19 is the main issue for today, but in North Korea, they are actually locking down their borders. They are saying that they are becoming self-sufficient, but they are in a very difficult situation. And so, given the fact that it's very difficult for them to solve their problems on their own, I think there's a high possibility that they will come back to the table to talk to the U.S. or South Korea. The Biden administration, they have announced their review of their North Korean policies, and they are saying that they will have a coordinated and practical approach. And in the past, they have asked for complete denuclearization before talks, but they have set denuclearization as their ultimate goal, but they are willing to take it step by step. And this approach has not been completely rejected by North Korea. And so they are looking to see what will happen with the current situation. And so given the relations with China, we can see that China is celebrating their 100th anniversary of the Communist Party. And they also believe that they don't want aggravation by North Korea to become a variable in achieving their China dream. And so I think this is a time to gather our wisdom to move forward. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So many points were raised, and I think that there could be a difference of opinions. For example, in terms of the relationship with the United States and North Korea, how much of effect of Korea playing the role of a mediator can be achieved? That's one view. Some people believe that it might not be that effective. Other people believe it could be effective. But also, there is a confrontation between U.S. and China. And in the past, I think that South Korea was in the middle, in between the large and strong countries. And Korea was very passive in its role and thought that survival was the only thing on our mind. We had to try to survive. However, we are no longer as weak as in the past, and we are as quite an advanced country now. And so, even though there is a confrontation between U.S. and China, there are people who believe that there is room for Korea to seek its own way and its own path. There are people who hold this view. So when it comes to the G2 confrontation, well, Korea and the U.S. has a security alliance, and China is the largest trade partner of Korea. And so even amidst the U.S. and Chinese confrontation, we have to find a way to strike a balance. Of course, it will not be easy, but how much can Korea do on its own to find the right positioning? That is something that is on the mind of many people, and I think that the new Southern policy can play a role. And President Chairperson Nam Yong-suk, I think, can comment on this. And she is the chairperson of the Presidential Committee on New Southern Policy. So we have just heard the summary of each session, and we try to look into the future direction. But now I think that it is time to focus our attention on certain topics. So first, I would like to invite Chairperson Moon Yong-sik. So we talk about digital transformation as we face the fourth industrial revolution. Whether we like it or not, this is something that is here to stay. And so we have to respond to the fourth industrial revolution and digital transformation. So what is the impact of this? We tend to talk about the negative impact and how we should respond. That is one thing that we can talk about. But I would like to listen to the view of President Moon.
Thank you very much. I am Moon Yong-sik of the National Information Society Agency. Maybe this name is unfamiliar. That's because we have changed our name. We are a think tank for information-related technologies in Korea. Related to the topic of Inclusive Korea 2021, Digital New Deal, Digital Vision, and Digital Transformation are the topics that I would like to cover today. Well, related to COVID-19, I have had two direct experiences. First, I think in the initial stages, when we did not have enough masks, that was when we had the biggest difficulties. That was the first time that President Moon actually apologized to the public that he did not manage the mask companies well. And so the policy was made to have limited sales through the pharmacies. So you could go to pharmacies and buy masks, but we needed to have an app to see where the masks are available. If we are to develop those apps according to government procedures, it would take 2 to 3 months. So we would need to have the purchase evaluation, we have commissioning. So if we go through all of the processes, it would take 2 to 3 months. And the Blue House asked us to develop the app as soon as possible. And so I received the call on Wednesday, and I had a meeting on Thursday, and we prepared for 3 days, and we came up with dozens of apps in just 3 days. And so we were able to provide apps to the people of Korea when they started to sell masks at pharmacies. That is the power of Korea's ICT. That is the power of open public administration. That is the power of our cloud infrastructure. We also have the chaos with vaccines later on. So during the vaccine chaos, we have come up with the vaccine registration system and the reservation system and the digital vaccination certification system. And so I think we have overcome the confusion with vaccines. That is the power of digital platforms. And therefore, I believe that we were able to overcome COVID-19 thanks to the power of digital. I believe that the economic crisis triggered by COVID-19 should be overcome through digital methods, and that is why I have suggested the Digital New Deal, and I have laid down the foundation for the Digital New Deal, and our organization is in charge of the Digital New Deal. I do hope that the Digital New Deal will have an impact on the people, on the society, and in businesses. So I would like to take this opportunity to talk about some of those impacts. Whenever I talk about digital new deals, I always say that it's trying to catch two birds with one stone. First, we have to create jobs, but at the same time, we also need innovative growth. So we need to pursue those two goals at the same time. With the inauguration of the Moon Jae-in administration, we have prepared for the digital transformation and the fourth industrial revolution. And because we were so well prepared, we were able to create the Digital New Deal with COVID-19. Policies don't appear out of the blue. We use what we have prepared to accelerate our efforts to create a new policy. And so the Digital New Deal is actually the acceleration of a digital transformation. So we had a 5 to 10-year plan for digital transformation, but we wanted to bring that down to just 2 years, so that we can concentrate on accelerating all of these processes. And we actually received a budget that was 10 times the original plan, and so we were able to come up with a Digital New Deal. On July 14th, we will celebrate the first anniversary of the Digital New Deal, and we need to make sure that the people of Korea can experience the benefits. Because of the Digital New Deal, we have created numerous jobs, and the AI education platform is another prime example. The cloud sourcing platform has created over 40,000 jobs, and we have created more than 80,000 jobs through the Digital New Deal. And this was possible because of the digital transformation and the foundation for innovative growth. The AI industry and the data industry are at the root of this growth. And so we need to make sure that AI transformation and data transformation is at the forefront. Let's take a look at the medical industry. At each hospital, they have immense data. And so each hospital has their own AI analytical model that they wanted to develop, but the government worked on supporting each hospital to conduct analytics. And so major hospitals of Korea joined the government efforts to bring their data into a single platform. And so we were able to trigger the opening of the medical AI data platform. And so overall, not only AI and data, the cloud industry was also important as a basic infrastructure. I cannot name all of the achievements that we have made, but I think overall in the industry of Korea, There are large companies that are focused on exports. Samsung Electronics, Hyundai Motors, POSCO, LG. These are the companies with global competitiveness, and they are doing very well for digital transformation using data and AI. And so they have acquired manufacturing competitiveness. And we also see that there are very strong IT platform companies in Korea. Well, of course, the platform industry is dominated by the US companies, and they are dominating over European companies and Japanese companies. Well, China has their own internet platform, and so that's a little bit of a different situation. But in Korea, we still have strong platform companies such as Naver, Kakao, and Coupang, and TOS, a fintech, and our delivery system called Baemin. All of these platform companies are very strong, and these companies are looking to move into the global market, in particular Southeast Asia. For innovative growth, knowledge-based startups are very important. There are many startups with global competitiveness, and we can see them building their competitiveness in each of their domains. And there are many companies with the potential to become top 10 in their given industry. And every year we see the birth of unicorns. LEAD is an education startup that has become a unicorn company. And Santa Toy is a service being provided based on search engines. And they have conducted a large M&A. And HyperConnect is another company that conducted a 2 trillion won M&A. Well, e-commerce by Coupang and our delivery app Baemin have become global companies. Krafton has become a global company, and in medicine we also see outstanding startups. So in each field, we have startups with global competitiveness, and we can see these startups growing within our ecosystem. And so I believe that we can set forth a digital vision. The golden times of Korea will come with a digital transformation. In specific ICT industries, we see that there is convergence to have high potential. So this is like electricity 100 years ago, the country that leverages ICT the best. Well, maybe we are behind in the core technologies, but in leveraging, we can be the best. We did not invent electricity, but we are leveraging electricity very well. This is the same for ICT. I believe that we can have our own brand of digital. Well, France has their own brand of culture and art, and I think digital can become our brand. I think we are known for our digital economy. In the post-COVID-19 era, the world will change, and one pillar of that will be the digital renaissance. And in the digital renaissance, we can become the #1 country. So we are talking about G10 or G7, but in the digital Renaissance era, we will be amongst the G3, just after the US and China. So I think I will need to end because time is passing. In order to do that, we will need a few strategies. First, we need digital governance. We need to make sure that the government CPO and CDO is established so that we can have a digital governance. And second, we need to prepare for the war over talent. Competition will come from talent. I think we are quite naive in dealing with this war over talent. The US, they are doing everything to win in this war over talent. They have invested hundreds of trillions of won so that they can win over China. The U.S. is looking to absorb talent from around the world through their immigration law and their new visa laws. I think we are being very naive in the way we respond to the war over talent. And if time allows, I would like to talk about this part a little bit more. But for now, I would like to talk about our vision of becoming global #1 in the digital world. Thank you very much.
고맙습니다.
Thank you very much.
G3까지 들어간다고
Well, becoming a part of the G3, wow, that is quite positive.
하셔가지고 여튼 뭐 기대가 큽니다.
So we have high expectations for our future. Having said that, well, you talked about how there is great job creation, but many people worry about the loss of jobs through digital transformation. And so if time allows, I think we can discuss this issue further.
Next, I would like to invite the green sector, and it's time to invite Professor Yoon Soon-jin. I would like to ask you, well, already you've given a presentation, so during this discussion, I would like you to focus on some of the pressing issues that we should focus on.
Thank you very much. I am Yoon Soon-jin, Chairperson of the 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission. I did present yesterday as well. We are living in a great transformation. The current generation is the last generation that can put a stop to 2 different crises. And we don't have a lot of time left. But this is not just a crisis, but at the same time, I believe that climate crisis is a warning given to us by nature. Up until now, we have used energy without paying back. And so now is the time to pay back. And if we are to use other sources of energy, then we have another opportunity for change, to live with the earth, to challenge our standards and maintain our environment. We talked about digital just before. Everything in digital is operated by energy. Here in this hall, we are continuing to use energy. The air conditioner is running. We have a lot of lighting. We have machinery. We have communication. All of that uses energy. But many people don't think about how this energy is created so that I can use this energy. We don't think about how this energy is moving our society and our world. And energy is very expensive, but no one wants to pay in full for this energy. And so, in this era of carbon neutrality, we need to become more interested in the issue of energy. It's not just about energy. We are seeing changes in our diet, and we are seeing changes in the Earth's surface. We have come up with land for farming, we have built structures, we have built roads, and we have cut down trees. Even now, we continue to talk about pandemic today, and the pandemic is closely linked with climate change. The current pandemic was triggered by large-scale development and deforestation, which led to global warming. In the past, the viruses that were far away from humans are now becoming closer to humans because we are encroaching on the environment. And so we are living in a crisis of economy, crisis of equality, crisis of pandemic, and crisis of energy. And so we need to make sure that we take these crises into consideration. And are we trying to come up with the solutions? Well, everyone talks about solutions, but we have many presidential candidates from both the ruling party and the opposition party. But we don't see any presidential candidate putting forth their policies for these crises that I have mentioned. The world is changing, And the whole world is based on the use of energy and our environment. But if we do not deal with these issues, all of the social systems that we talk about will not be possible. And so we need to give this issue some serious thought. So I think we need to take this into consideration. Therefore, how are we going to find solutions? Well, actually, it is quite unfortunate these days that around the world, we are looking to reduce energy consumption and we are looking to do electrification and using renewables. Just like I mentioned yesterday, RE100 is a campaign that is being conducted by companies voluntarily, and this is changing the global market. So there are companies joining this campaign to say that they will only be using renewable energy. 319 major companies have signed up for this campaign. Korea is manufactured-centered, we are export-oriented, and so we have to start with RE100, and nuclear energy is not included in RE100. But there are still people talking about nuclear energy. We can no longer afford to talk about nuclear energy. We have to take a look at the global trends, and we have to take a look at what we need to prepare for in the future. So it is quite unfortunate that we're not thinking about the future and the global trends. There are many global trends, and in Korea, shipbuilding, refinery, steel industry, ICT, these are world-renowned industries that we have in Korea. But in order for these industries to continue to maintain our lives, the industries must be transformed. These industries may disappear, but the way they use energy and the way they may manufacture must change. And if we succeed in making that transformation, then we could have new opportunities and new jobs. And through innovative changes, we can continue to contribute to the global society. We need to make sure that we become proactive in this transformation. So this is the direction that we need to move in. And so we need to make sure that we approach these issues with these trends in mind. The 2050 carbon neutrality mission has several roles that we must play, one of which is to achieve the goal of 2050 carbon neutrality. We are in the process of imagining the scenarios for the society that we wish to become in 2050 before coming up with a roadmap. There is a lack of accurate understanding of carbon neutrality. How many people are actually understanding carbon neutrality? How many people are interested in carbon neutrality? We need to change the world together. We no longer live in an era where just a few can change the world. Carbon neutrality is not just about emitting carbon and then absorbing the carbon back. Well, actually, it's about reducing emissions as much as possible first, and that is why we need great efforts. We need an innovative breakthrough. Currently, 650 million tons were emitted, but in the next 30 years, we have to bring that down to zero. How would that be possible? We need to make it possible. And so we have to think about the how. We have to give this some serious thought. But we have the possibility. Recently, I met the Danish ambassador, and they have the best wind farms, and they have a great company related to wind farms. And Oecd is another Danish company that was a company that had the 90% market share in coal generation. But this company has transformed into a renewable energy company in just a decade. And so the Danish ambassador mentioned that Korea has great potential for growth. The power technology for wind farm is #1 in the world in Korea. And for offshore wind farms, the structures that go under the turbines is very important, and this structure is #1 in the world, and the undersea cable technology is #1 in the world. We also have great #1 technologies across the industries. But rather than moving forward in a new direction, we continue to become linked to past laurels. A civic group related to economics published a report recently, and they said that we have to go back to nuclear energy because renewables is not possible right now. Well, the top 5 companies in Korea wish to become a part of RE100, and as I mentioned before, there are 6 SK companies and Amore Pacific, Korea Water Power, Hydropower, and other companies are already a part of RE100. We need to join this campaign in order to survive in the global market. Well, even if companies want to join RE100, there is not enough renewable energy available. The dissemination of renewable energy is too slow in Korea. There is conflicts over whether renewable energy facilities can be built in each region. The renewable energy facilities do not impact the surrounding environment. Are we going to go back to nuclear and coal power? We need to use renewable energy because the impact on the environment is much lower compared to existing generation plans. And so now, all Koreans must be interested in producing renewable energy. Each region must produce their own renewable energy. And we need to have everyone on board for switching into a carbon-neutral society. And when that happens, we can have balanced national development. The rural areas, they can lead the urban areas because they have more potential to produce energy. The last point that I would like to make is power is power. Electricity is power now. If we can produce more electricity, if we can produce more power, that is the direction that our society should go in. If we reduce our consumption and produce more power, then we can change our society. And so we need to renew our awareness towards this direction. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yes, so I think that the presidential election campaign will begin, and the candidates for the presidential election should pay attention to Chairperson Yoon Soon-jin. Last but not least, I would like to invite Chairperson Nam Young-suk. She will talk about economy, trade, and the new Southern policy. Please go ahead. Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon. I am the chairperson of the Presidential Committee on New Southern Policy. My name is Nam Young-suk, and thank you very much for inviting me. Now, I understand that at this conference, the economy and trade sector has not been widely discussed compared to other sectors. So I would like to introduce to you the New Southern Policy. The New Southern Policy targets ASEAN and India and the countries in the southern region, and to work with them to have them be as influential as the major 4 countries and to ensure that prosperity enjoyed by all these countries. So this was announced by President Moon Jae-in under this goal. There's 3 axes. There is people, prosperity, and peace. So there are the 3 P's of the new Southern policy. In the past, we pursued interests, but rather you can say that this is an inclusive, cooperation-based policy and relationship. So after announcing this new Southern policy, President Moon Jae-in visited 11 countries in the region and also commemorating the dialogue that began 30 years ago, the special summit with Korea and ASEAN was held. And also there was the launch of the Presidential Committee on New Southern Policy, and also the ASEAN Foreign Embassy was upgraded to a vice minister level. And so I do believe that there is heightened understanding and awareness of the new Southern Policy now. And the new Southern Policy Plus was also announced. So to focus and select 7 strategic initiatives were announced. And so there was an upgrade to the policy. Let me briefly introduce this to you. The first initiative is the post-COVID-19 comprehensive healthcare support. So K-quarantine and K-health know-hows will be shared with the countries that fall under the new Southern Policy, and we support healthcare. Number 2 is in the field of education. The Korean education model is shared, and also fostering human resources is also supported. The third initiative is the mutual cultural exchanges. State-of-the-art digital technology is utilized to promote cultural exchanges and also to introduce the Korean contents and also to engage in non-face-to-face exchanges as well. Number 4 is a mutually reciprocal trade relationship establishment. And so to respond to the global supply chain, we want to develop our exchanges with this region. And also, the RCEP has been launched, and the CSR strengthening can help us lead to strengthening the foundation for mutual prosperity. And next is the co-prosperity promotion through the development of infrastructure in rural areas. So infrastructure will be developed in the rural areas, and also smart cities will also be developed to help the people enjoy a better life. Number 6 is cooperation in future industries. The ASEAN countries are also very interested in this area. Startups, Fourth Industrial Revolution, 5Gs, and new industries are areas where we are strengthening cooperation, especially in the post-COVID-19 era. Last but not least, the 7th initiative is to create a more stable, safe, and peaceful ASEAN community. And for this, climate change and water management, coastal management, and also human-centered, non-traditional security cooperation is emphasized, and also to strengthen the recovery of the Mekong River. Efforts are being made to support our partners. And so this new Southern Policy is being pursued and initiated by the South Korean government. And so the new Southern Policy actually has been evaluated as having opened up new horizons. The new Southern Policy actually has very great significance. Geographically, it is located in between the U.S., Europe, and also there is a young population, very dynamic and high growth potential. U.S., Europe, Japan, for example, have been focusing on the importance and the value of the new Southern Policy. There has been an announcement of the Indo-Pacific strategy as well. So there has been heightened interest in our new Southern Policy. Also, there has been further confrontation between the U.S. and China. And so we can see that amidst such a new environment, the ASEAN countries are actually increasing their proportion in the global supply chain. So as such, the new Southern Policy is gaining greater significance. Also, President Moon Jae-in, after the outbreak of COVID-19, held face-to-face summits for the first time recently. As you know, there was a U.S.-Korea summit, and there was a P4G summit, and the G7 summit, and we were able to recognize the heightened status of the Republic of Korea. And last Friday, Unctad had actually elevated Korea's status, and in the closing ceremony, it was announced that Korea was moved into the group of advanced countries. It was moved from the group of developing countries into the group of developed countries. So Korea's new status has been recognized around the world. Since UNCTAD was established, it's the first time that a country has had its status elevated from a developing country to a developed country. And after the outbreak of COVID-19, the Korean president visited the U.S. for the first face-to-face summit after COVID-19. And so there was a document agreed upon and announced, and semiconductors, batteries, AI, next generation telecommunication technology, biotechnology were areas for cooperation with the U.S. These are actually core advanced industries that can actually utilize the strengths that our companies have. And also, we agreed upon the vaccine partnership with the U.S. The Global Vaccine Partnership actually utilizes the raw technology concerning vaccines and also combines it with the development and production capabilities that is world-class held by Korea to overcome the challenges faced by having to distribute vaccines around the world amidst this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Also, after the U.S. summit, U.S.-Korea summit, the president participated in the G7 summit, and it was evaluated that Korea's heightened status was proven through this participation in the G7 summit. And also there was a plan to contribute 1 billion worth of vaccine. And also Korea pledged support of $100 million this year and the same amount next year, so that it will join the G7 countries in overcoming this global challenge. And so Korea has seen its elevated status from a country that had followed the other nations around the world, but now it is leading the countries around the world. And so I do believe Korea, when it comes to responding to COVID-19 and other important global issues such as dealing with climate change, has become a major important nation that has to participate in these global discussions and is leading the way in global cooperation as well. And we could really see for ourselves this elevated status. So there will be further summits. For example, there is the G20 summit, and also there is the COP conference for climate change, and Korea will participate, and Korea will show its status as a responsible member of the international community, and Korea will do its work to contribute to the efforts made by the global community. Dr. Bang No-ja is here as well, but actually I was in Norway as the ambassador of Korea to Norway, and I think that overseas, the status of Korea is different from the status of Korea perceived here in Korea. So the perception is a little bit different overseas. The people outside of Korea are really curious how Korea was able to successfully quarantine the nation while not blocking its borders. And at the same time, as Korea announced the Korean New Deal, which includes the Digital New Deal and the Green New Deal, people are showing interest in how such efforts can continue amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I think that right now we have many challenges ahead, but we have been able to overcome crisis situations. And amidst that, I think that we can utilize the given opportunities to create an inclusive nation. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. So when we talked about peace, we talked about the middleweight diplomacy, and Korea has seen its status go up from a developing country to a developed country. And I think that what we have to think about is that as Korea has been put into the group of developed countries, still Korea does not have any tendency to become an imperialistic power. I think that universal values are pursued by Korea, and one of those values would be peace. So we pursue peace as part of the 3 Ps, and this is part of the New Southern Policy. So peace, prosperity, and people are at the center of this New Southern Policy. So it's not about imperialistic power that Korea is pursuing, but rather Korea wants to prosper with the world, and it wants to promote the global values. So I think that universal values have to be further emphasized. And also, in the past, the history of Korea was a history of Korea being hurt by surrounding major powers. But now, Korea has further advanced. It is recognized as a developed country. So I think that we should have more confidence. And based on that confidence, I think we should think about how we can thrive, not only survive amongst the confrontation between the U.S. and China, but we should think about, as one of the countries in the League Advanced Nations, we should think about how we can further promote the universal values around the world. So I think that that is part of this new Southern policy, and it was not mentioned here today, but the new Northern policy. Of course, there is an inter-Korean issues, so we were not able to more actively pursue with a new Northern policy. But I think that once we have that implemented in full-fledged, I think that inclusive globalization could be pursued. And perhaps Korea can play the role of a bridge that connects the different countries and the regions together. So I think that we have to hold a broader perspective as we engage the world. So I think we have only about 20 minutes remaining. So we did not have enough time to engage in sufficient discussions about the given topics. So for the remaining time, we will receive questions from the floor, answer the questions, and carry on our discussions. So we have a person in the audience raising his hand. Can you please introduce yourself and ask your question?
Thank you very much for this opportunity to participate in this important gathering. I am Kwon Yo-won of the Information and ICT Research Institute. We are talking about the 4-year journey of the Moon Jae-in administration, but the bigger topic is inclusive recovery and a leap forward. And so I would like to ask my questions to President Han and President Nam. In terms of inclusive recovery, just like President Han has mentioned, being just is very important. The excessive concentration of economic power leads to various social problems. As President Moon has mentioned, if we are to meet our golden times, it will be through digital transformation. I am also looking forward to this. But if we take a look at the current times, Google and other platforms are becoming prevalent, and it seems that the concentration of economic power is becoming more excessive. And so, in order to overcome this excessive concentration, we need to work on the inequalities of assets and information. What are some of the legal and institutional solutions that can be found? And what are some of the priorities for such legal and institutional measures? My next question goes to President Nam Young-suk. Well, a leap forward is the catchword today. And just like the chairperson has mentioned, the new Southern policy will indeed play a large role for the next leap forward. And in the new Southern policy, I can see that trade with the countries covered under this policy is larger than the trade with the new Northern policy countries. And we have recently seen a government policy announced for the new Southern policy. Could you share with us the percentage of trade within our overall trade with the Southern policy countries? And what do you believe will be the trend in the next 5 years? And what do you believe is the role of the K-New Deal for the New Southern Policy and the relevant trade? I would like to go to the answers right away. We will go to President Han first, and then we will go to Chairperson Nam for the New Southern Policy.
That was a great question, but I don't think I am the right person to answer your question, considering my field of expertise. Fair trade and fair competition, in order to ensure this, what kind of institutions and legislations are needed? That was the question. And I think that, of course, we need the basic regulations for promoting fair trade and competition, and also the institutions required for democratization of the economy and the market. Of course, there are room for improvement in going in this direction. For example, we talked about the new institutions that have put into place. For example, the multi-representative litigation system, but not much progress has been made. We have not been able to swiftly pursue with these changes. In the 20th round of the National Assembly meetings, I do hope that we can make further progress and speed up so that we can see more tangible results. I think that is the answer that I can give you. And I think that the person who asked the question probably knows better than me about this issue. Yes, Chairperson Nam? Yes, thank you very much. I did mention this, but there are 7 initiatives under the New Southern Policy, and the New Southern Policy actually is a very comprehensive policy that aims for comprehensive economic ties and exchanges. But if we look at the trade alone, as I mentioned before, the trade agreement, ASEP, this would be take effect hopefully this year. But we have been making efforts to improve our trade relations, and we are trying to increase the trade and investment in this region. But also at the same time, we have the Digital New Deal and the Green New Deal, so we expect that cooperation in these new areas will further expand as well. So the experts and the government officials within the New Southern Policy region say that they want cooperation in the digital field. And as I mentioned before, tackling climate change, coastal issues, water management, these non-traditional sectors for cooperation aside from the traditional security field are areas that they wish to seek support from Korea or cooperate with Korea. So these could be included in the Digital New Deal of Korea. So I think that as we pursue Digital New Deal and the Korean New Deal, we could think about how we can cooperate with other emerging and developing countries, including the ASEAN countries. And as I mentioned before, well, there is a restructuring. We'll talk about restructuring the global value chain and supply chain. So each country is looking at ways to further strengthen their competitiveness and play a role in this global supply chain. So at such a time, I think that we have to think about how we can also strengthen our capacities and how we can better cooperate with other countries for a win-win result. So we see that trade is increasing with our partners under the New Southern Policy, and I do believe that we can continue to maintain such a constructive relationship. Yes, thank you very much. Let us receive further questions. Yes, I think we have one person raising his hand. Yes, I think that this is an excellent opportunity, and thank you for providing this opportunity. My name is Kim Young-jun, and I was a presenter in the previous session. I have a quick question. also for Chairperson Yoon Soo-jin. But first, well, there was a mentioning of Kim Jong-un having the qualities of a CEO and a king. But I think that if we look at the leadership of Kim Jong-un in the context of North Korea, that might be an accurate evaluation. But I don't think that a lot of people in the global community agrees, especially the Korean Peninsula experts in Washington. They are not North Korean experts, so they don't know about the past events that took place in North Korea. But they are working as Korean Peninsula experts in Washington, and they have very narrow-sided views, but nevertheless, they are working as a specialist focusing on issues concerning the Korean Peninsula. So, I would like to ask the question. Now, those who are working in the Washington think tanks, now, I believe that there has to be more experts newly fostered to promote the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. So I would like to ask of you whether you agree with this, whether it would be the right way to go to foster these new experts who can help promote the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. And also, I fully agree with the opinion of Chairperson Yoon. Now, I have met with a lot of people in Washington, and I've received this question about the Moon Jae-in administration. Well, isn't there a contradiction in President Moon Jae-in's approach? But I think that it is not a contradiction. It just reflects the spirit of our times, because when it comes to nuclear energy, well, it is because we are focusing now on renewable energy that the jobs are declining in the field of nuclear energy development. Well, the non-proliferation experts, they listen to the views of the experts of nuclear energy here in Korea, and they say that President Moon Jae-in actually is holding a contradictory position when it comes to nuclear energy. So I would like to ask Chairperson Yoon's view on this issue. Well, there has been a lot of media reports about this, but I would like to ask your recommendation and your view on this. Yes, I think that the first question was given to President Ko.
Well, concerning the leadership of Kim Jong-un, I think it would be too long to evaluate his leadership, so I will not go into that. But if we take a look at the last 30 years of negotiations related to North Korea's nuclear program, ever since the fall of the socialist bloc, the U.S. was the superpower, the sole superpower, but they still could not solve the nuclear issue. There are many reasons, but one of that is because they don't have an accurate understanding of North Korea. They did not know who they were negotiating with. They were using U.S. standards and global standards in dealing with North Korea. And when they do that, they cannot succeed in negotiations. And at times, they would neglect North Korea's intentions. Sometimes they would misunderstand North Korea's intentions. And so I think it's unfortunate that they did not know North Korea accurately. And so we see that there's quite a shortage of North Korean experts in the U.S. And I think we could have made more efforts as well from the South Korean side. Of course, there were some research institutes that tried to help the U.S. understand North Korea, but even now, there is still a shortage of diplomatic efforts. The Hanoi New Deal that we always talk about these days, and we always talk about how the Japanese interfered with that, because the U.S.-Japan relations was very close at that time. Some people say that Japan actually interfered with those negotiations. When there were potential agreements that were reported in the media, Japan interfered in that process. And that was due to the Japanese diplomacy in Washington, D.C. Well, because I don't think I will have another opportunity to speak, I would like to add my comment related to the New Southern Policy. When we designed the New Southern Policy, as we talked about the grand design previously in the presentations and discussions, well, the new Korean Peninsula regime was not executed because of the Hanoi New Deal, and the New Southern Policy was in the big picture along with the new economic community on the Korean Peninsula. And we thought that we could improve the inter-Korean relations. And we would connect that with the new Northern Policy. And the new Southern Policy and the new Northern Policy would be connected by the Northeast Asian community. This Northeast Asian plus community was not expanded. It was not seen through. And I think history would look back on the New Southern Policy and give high valuations of that. During that time, there were conflicts between Korea and China because of the thought issue. And because we have a high reliance on China in terms of our economics, there were many difficulties. And so we were looking to diversify our trade relations. And that is why we strive to achieve the New Southern Policy. This is ASEAN plus India, and so the scale is very high. If we would actually include China in this, then that would actually impact the hegemony of the U.S. But the U.S. actually separated India from this strategy, and the One Belt, One Road policy of China included India. Well, Japan wanted to make an effort on this front, but we made a great effort in expanding our economic map. And this New Southern Policy was a very good complement to the Indo-Pacific strategy of the U.S. and the One Belt, One Road policy of China. And so the New Southern Policy played a great role even amongst the G2 conflict. And so I believe that the New Southern Policy was a very good preemptive move, and so I believe that history would evaluate this strategy very highly. Yes, Professor Yoon? I think that was a very important question. I think many people are pointing this out. What about the ethical side? So we are saying that this is very dangerous in Korea, but why are we exporting these technologies overseas? Isn't that an ethical issue? Well, actually in Korea, the danger of nuclear plants is higher than other countries because the concentration of nuclear plants per unit of land is the highest in the world. And furthermore, the areas surrounding the nuclear plants are seeing more and more earthquakes. Last year, we had 2 hurricanes that actually had salt water going into 6 nuclear reactors, and we had to stop the operation of these nuclear reactors. With climate change, we will have more frequent extreme weather events such as hurricanes, which will then endanger the nuclear power plants even further. Well, when we think about the concentration of nuclear plants, we have the highest in the world per unit of land. But if we take a look at the 4 major areas of nuclear plants, we have 6 plants per area. And there are no other areas in the world with 6 nuclear plants. Only 6% of the nuclear plants around the world are included in this high density range, but all of our nuclear plants are included in that range. We actually have 3.8 million people living around the Gori nuclear plant. And if we take a look at Canada, they only have 100,000 people living in the area where there's a concentration of nuclear plants. And so we can see that there are millions of people living around the nuclear plant area. And so if there were to be an accident, it would have devastating influence. And so in terms of safety, it would be very dangerous to build additional nuclear plants. In terms of exports, this is an issue that we need to approach from the industry side. We have excellent talent, we have great industrial potential, and that is why we are exporting nuclear plants. But I don't think these exports would be successful because around the world, there are not many countries that are planning to expand the number of nuclear plants. And even if they do have such plans, they are in Russia, China, and Eastern European regions. And so we don't have a lot of competitive edge in those areas. For Saudi Arabia, when President Moon visited the US and the two heads of states announced their declaration, we did talk about exporting nuclear plants, but without the promise of non-proliferation, we cannot export. And so there are not many regions where we can export under the promise of non-proliferation. So what do we need to do now? We need to eliminate nuclear plants step by step. We have 24 nuclear reactors and 4 are in the process of being built, and the ones that are being built are 1.4 megahertz per nuclear reactor. And so we need to continue to foster talent for the safe management of these nuclear plants. And there are no country in the world that has the safe technology to treat the used nuclear fuel. We continue to develop relevant technologies from the 1950s, so there is no answer as to how we're going to safely treat the used fuel. Well, we talk about SMR these days. These are small module type reactors. These are small modular reactors. For the small reactors, we need to take a look at whether they are economically feasible. The reactors are becoming bigger and bigger because of the economy of scale. But if we are making our reactors smaller, then we would have no economy of scale. But are they still reactors? Yes, they are reactors. And so we would have nuclear materials used there, and there is still the possibility of accidents. And where are we going to build such SMRs? Well, the citizens, they don't want the wind farms to be built in their neighborhoods. So where are you going to find a community that are willing to accept SMRs? SMRs are still nuclear reactors, and so it's still very serious. In order to solve climate change, we need to become carbon neutral by 2050. And before that, by 2030, we have to reduce our emissions by 45%, which means that we have to make great efforts in the next 10 years. If we continue to talk about nuclear fusion and SMR, they are not commercial technologies that are viable in the next 10 years. And so possibly we can conduct research concerning nuclear fusion and SMR, but it cannot be solutions for climate change. Recently, these reactors are very large in size, and they continue to send out electricity to the grid. And when we continue to increase renewable energy, there's a collision between the two. If SMRs continue to send out electricity into the grid, and if we have renewables that are trying to send out energy into the grid, they are actually taking up so much of the grid that renewable energy cannot send their electricity into the grid. And so we need to think about these issues. We need to have a wise approach for this issue. Well, it seems that we have surpassed the time allocated for our session.
So now it's time to wrap up, but last but not least, I think we can hear President Moon talk about the job creation issue? Yes. I know we're out of time, but nevertheless, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak one more time. And there was a question regarding the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the era of AI and concerns about jobs decreasing. But the situation has changed considerably. Past about 10 years ago, when we talked about AI and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, we really thought that perhaps there is a possibility that AI would replace people, and there was a lot of concern about machines taking over the positions and the jobs of people. And so there was a lot of robots and a lot of discussions about basic income. But after 10 years, we can see that AI is not as smart as we had anticipated. AI cannot replace human beings. AI can cooperate with people to enhance the productivity level of people. But AI cannot replace people in all aspects. So that is something that is very clear. So in some areas, for example, we might seek automation and unmanned services such as at the cashier. But I think that compared to the jobs that are replaced by machines, there will be more new jobs created. So if we look at the first and second industrial revolution, we can recognize that this was how it was in history. And so in the new revolution, we can once again confirm, and we will be able to confirm, that once again machines will not be able to entirely replace the jobs and the roles of human beings, but we will be able to enjoy greater productivity. We will not have to work 5 days a week. Probably 4 days a week we will work. The remaining 3 years we can use it to enjoy leisure activities or realize our dreams. So, or use the time to care for our family members or others. So I think that that would be the trend in the future, in my personal view. Yes, thank you very much. Let me wrap up. So we held a discussion on the Moon Jae-in administration's 4-year journey, inclusive recovery, and a leap forward. There was discussions and sessions held for 2 days, and I think that we covered the 4-year journey in 2 days, but the 2 days also seem to be quite a long time for us to gather together, engage in discussions. I think that there are different views when it comes to the achievements. Yesterday and today, what we were able to confirm, however, is that there are still challenges that we have to deal with, but if we look at the overall flow and the overall situation, we are at a period of transition, but we are going in the right direction. And having said that, after we recover from COVID-19, Korea will be given the opportunity to recover and make another leap forward. One concern, however, is the issue of inclusion. During the past financial crisis, well, we did recover, but still the financial crisis left a lot of scars, and one of the scars would be polarization in our society. And I think that we should not repeat the errors that we made back then. So when we seek for another leap forward, we will have to think about how we can pursue inclusive recovery and that we can overcome the challenge of polarization in our society. So for the past 2 days, thank you very much for joining us. And also I would like to thank the participants in this last session and also the people in the audience who have stayed until the very end. Thank you very much. And with this, I would like to conclude the roundtable discussion.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of Inclusive Korea 2021, the Moon Jae-in administration's 4-year journey, inclusive journey, and a leap forward. It is quite unfortunate that we have not been able to meet everyone on site, but thank you for joining us online, and thank you for honoring us with your presence. The presentations and discussions presented at Inclusive Korea 2021 is downloadable through the website, and you will be able to see the videos using our YouTube channel. Once again, thank you very much for joining us until the very end. I am Kim Mi-young. Thank you.